And so I came back with the kind of proposition, can you take the quality of life of the suburban house and integrate it into the life in an apartment building and actually therefore diffuse the desire to live in suburbia because you can respond to it in the city. And so just briefly, Habitat was about, like for everyone a garden, can you, I can use a more contemporary word, fractalize the apartment building so that it opens up and breaks up to provide private gardens, public open space, transparency, and all the qualities we have come to associate it with it. And we also thought about other ways of building, prefabricating, large scale, factory production, and so on and so forth. And whereas you could argue about many of the technological assumptions, one thing for sure, it did prove that people desired to live there, that it actually was a quantum jump in terms of the quality of life that apartments offered. And today you can, 50 years later, it's a cohesive community. It has the quality of life that is kind of an interesting balance between urbanity, community, and the privacy of the individual house. But as years went by, first of all, I should say that through the 1970s, there was very little interest in housing, in academia and in the profession, particularly not urban housing. And the reality was that densities became much more intense. This is Hong Kong, much more intense than we ever imagined in 1967. And so some 15 years ago, we set ourselves a proposition in the office. We set up a research fellowship saying, let's revisit that habitat. Let's revisit and see if we would, how would we do it different today? Could we cope with the issues of mixed use development? Could we show the advantages of mixed use? Could we deal with a range of densities that are commonplace to Hong Kong and Singapore and Shanghai and Sao Paulo? These were some of the models that we made in that 1 year of studies of different arrangements, different systems, different densities. And I'll just touch on a few, which range from taking habitat and simplifying its construction into a vertical panel system, which we thought would achieve great economies, and see whether we could achieve the same amenities and quality of life that we had in the more complex Expo prototype. Or going to greater densities and trying to create housing membranes that would actually allow people to completely finish and design their own dwelling within a platform within that membrane. A particularly interesting part of the study was to take a case of New York, map the land uses and densities which were in Midtown Manhattan. And for your reference, that is an FAR of 12. And you can see their residences, retail, and offices in the different colors. And we reorganized that in a way which placed the office spaces in the lower layers of the development, the residential above it. This translated into a model that had several objectives. One, to show the advantages of mixing the uses in this particular case. Secondly, to try and develop public realm, a public street at the level 25, interfacing between residences and office space and retail, etc., and to maintain a kind of porosity, even though this is the same density as Midtown, that if you built this along Central Park or along the East River, you would still not create a block, a wall, but you would maintain the porosity in the city. And we developed this in more detail than the others so that we started exploring the economy of construction, etc. And what was particularly interesting is the speed with which some of these concepts translated into our work in practice. This is a complex that was completed some years ago in Qingguandao, China. It's a coastal city. Again, the issue was maintaining a porosity so that the development that was already behind us on the shoreline would not be blocked, so that we would not be blocking the city from the sea. And this is middle income housing, and we were actually quite amazed that we were able to achieve this kind of quality of life with terracing and public playgrounds and so within the structure, within these circumstances. And a project in Singapore, also middle income housing, and actually conventionally built, I would suggest, I would say that incorporated, this is 600 units, and this is family housing, lots and lots of families with kids. 3 bridge levels that became community levels with playgrounds and public facilities and swimming pools. And again, outdoor spaces to all the units, either in the form of balconies or terraces, and managing to do so within the constraints of a commercial client, middle income housing, unsubsidized. And just another example, this one is not middle income housing. This is luxury housing in Colombo in Sri Lanka, that again tried to relate the outdoor spaces and indoor spaces into a project that here is of a formidable density, a 65-story tower. So I would move on to the, let me move on to the next theme, which is the question of globalization. And let me say in introduction that this has been something that for me originated very early in my career when I came to build in Jerusalem. And I came to realize that there is a paradox between the way I was brought up as an architect, the international style, all solutions are universal, and then coming to a very particular city that was very challenging in terms of the notion of belonging. And so going back to kind of the origin of the question, can we share?
It's been shared. Go to the next, is it not?
Oh, oops. Stop, share.
Yeah, we're sharing.
Again, sorry.
Sorry, 1 second.
Are you seeing our images?
No, they're seeing you.
No, we see you.
Okay, I don't want to see me. Do you see the screen now?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. This one, right there. Keep going.
This one?
Okay, that's it. Can you see the screen? Oops. Are we good?
We still see you.
We're just going to
Oops.
share now.
No.
Are we good?
Yes.
So you all know Jerusalem, and I don't need to dwell on it too much, and you probably know the projects there. But, you know, in Manila, in the old city, the question always was, can you build a contemporary city, a contemporary development in a very sensitive historic city? And can you do so in a way that is harmonious and with a sense of continuity with the past? And this actually was a place where I began to realize that the notion of importing or transporting design solution from one place to the other really didn't work. And it took a long time to understand the vernacular, the fabric of the city. This is the Hebrew Union College, which is part abutting the Mamilla project, to come to terms with this question. But soon thereafter, and I'm going to show you a project that's 30 years old now, the National Gallery of Canada, which followed the Jerusalem experience, the same question came up. The National Gallery was across from Parliament. It is a very Nordic city. You can see the site on the of the gallery on the right side, Parliament on the left side. And the question then was, how do you relate to this neo-Gothic Nordic city? And out of it evolved a kind of an architecture that attempted to be in dialogue with this setting, and the crystalline architecture, which kind of recognized this is the coldest capital in the world, as a place that creates public spaces which have kind of the range of life that can deal with this cold climate. This is a great hall of the National Gallery, the ceiling or the roof of and it opens up and like a kaleidoscope, allowing the sun in or shading from the sun and transforming as the seasons changed. But also for me, this was a museum that had to demonstrate that it was an extrovert, publicly reaching out building, that what the life within it became part of the life of the city, that it accepted the role as a ceremonial space because it's the capital, and that's where there would be the events of heads of state and formal dinners and so on and so forth. And it was this merging of official capital, Ottawa, in its Gothic setting that evolved the architecture. This is the photograph of Prime Minister Trudeau coming up the ceremonial ramp to the dinner in the Great Hall with President Obama. And now I got to figure out how to make sure that President Trump never gets there for an official dinner. Another project in that evolution was a project of the National Museum of the Sikhs in India. And unexpectedly, that project was born at Yad Vashem when the Prime Minister of the Punjab had visited Yad Vashem, and he was very moved by the building. Actually, it was a children's memorial that he had seen at the time. And he asked to meet the architect. By good fortune, I was there, and invited me to design the National Museum. And the first thing that happened is that they took me to the Golden Temple, which in Amritsar, which is their holiest place, and it's quite an extraordinary place where within the city is that great, wonderful, you could call it a giant courtyard, filled all water with the Golden Temple in its center. So it was a tall order when I visited the site and started thinking about how the National Museum of the Sikhs would emerge. And there were rumblings, of course, what would this foreigner know about Sikh culture, etc. On the upper hand corner, let me just see the slide missing, sorry. So these are some of the first sketches I made after visiting the site, which is abutting a very small town and sitting on some sand hills. The top left is the fortress city of Jaisalmer. And Sikh culture is very much centered on fortresses and defense as a minority group that had been very persecuted and always on the defense. And so I was building up from this notion in this small town, from this notion of rising the architecture out of the sand hills, damming the valley into a great water garden, and creating two components, one that abuts the town with an auditorium and a library and changing exhibition, and across the water, the history museum of the Sikh people. And these were some of the models we brought to involve the community. This was a large model on the site. There was a great deal of excitement. And one thing became central is to what extent can this architecture evolve in a way that those in the Punjab, the Sikh community, would embrace it and identify with it. I was very sensitive to and concerned over this issue. The groundbreaking in itself tells you a little bit about how central the project was in the community's mind. And then 3 months later, as we returned to present further work, we already saw that the pedestrian bridge across between the two hills had been built. So here is the finished building, which I will not go into great detail, but you can see it's a concrete structure. It's clad with local Cavalier stone. The roofs are stainless steel. They kind of are inverse echo of the architecture of the traditional Sikh temple, the Gurdwara. They integrate the landscape into the structure, and they, in a sense, evoke, I mean, my own feeling, having arrived there at some point, was that it is as if it's always been there, but yet clearly contemporary building. Some of the interior spaces, this is an exhibit where the life cycle of a Sikh farmer from season to season is displayed by carvings and works by craftsmen from all over India. And finally, in the sequence, complete different change of setting and place and problem, a Museum of American Art in middle of America, in Arkansas, on a wooded site next to a small town, Bentonville, where Walmart, which is one of the biggest retailers in the world, was founded. And you see the stream going through the valley, and I opted not to build on the hills, which would have meant cutting many, many trees and building right at the bottom of the valley in the stream. And I propose that that stream, which is nourished by crystal springs, would be dammed. And by creating the dams, we would have ponds, very much like they did when they built the mill towns in the United States. And the ponds would become the centerpiece where the museum would have its pavilions clustered around it. So from the sketch to the reality, the two ponds flowing downstreams, the two buildings which bridge across, and then the pavilions on either sides of the shores of the museum. And then in order to really relate to the place and also for maximum sustainability, we decided the entire building would be built from local timber, yellow pine of Arkansas, but using it in a very technologically advanced way. So the vertical structures are concrete and the rest of it is wood. And as it crosses the ponds, there are suspension cables that you can see here spanning from side to the other side of the pond with the laminated wood beams spanning across. And thus all the structures in the complex are laminated wood beams, concrete, and glass. This is a cross-section through the building, which is both a dam and a bridge. It contains galleries under the great wood shelter roof. The transparency to the exterior and the integration of art and nature is one of the major objectives of the museum. And as you enter the galleries within, buildings within a building, you get this extraordinary soft, even daylight, experiencing the art in perfect lighting conditions. Which moves me on to the public realm. And the public realm has been very much on my mind, and working, it really begins with the conviction that the evolution of the shopping experience, and we did see one very interesting study on this morning in the reviews, is that the mall, as it has evolved from the shopping center and so on, is really a counterproductive, privatized, unsuccessful public realm. I think that the desire for climate control, the conveniences that the mall offers are fundamental, but at the same time, what has occurred through the privatization of, are we into the same problem yet?
No.
Back to the images?
No, wait, just here. Resume share.
Okay, I'm with.
There. You are sharing our screen.
I apologize.
Never. Yeah, so
Good?
yeah.
So I want to take you to show you Marina Bay Sands, and also to explain why I was particularly interested in this project, because it was not either my love or experience with casinos or integrated resorts, as they are called, but really that I saw in Marina Bay Sands an opportunity to make an important development and evolution in the public realm, of the design of the public realm. Because here was a project that included hotels and convention centers and shopping and theaters and museums. And it was also set in Singapore, where the Public Planning Authority had the commitment to creating a wholesome and effective public realm.
Sorry,
And
Moshe, we see you. We don't see the slides.
Oh, wow, that's not good. Okay, sorry. Let me go back then.
Do you see that?
Do you see the screen?
No, we still see you.
You
Now
see-
we see the screen, yes.
Okay, so Marina Bay Sands. And I go back to a diagram that was actually developed by the Planning Authority of Singapore, which said we're creating this site out of landfill where Marina Bay Sands is. We're enclosing our harbor into a bay, and we have the Singapore River running into it. And those yellow dots are the promenade across the entire bay and river that they wanted to create as a singular, continuous, uninterrupted public realm. And so I took the cue from this and developed the entire plan of Marina Bay Sands, building upon that. And one of the reference images that I referred to at the time was the Madaba Plan of Jerusalem, and demonstrating the principle of the Cardo Maximus as a lifeline of the city around which all the various components organize themselves, so that you have this spine of urban life. And so Marina Bay became kind of an integration of two concepts: the promenade along the river, which was mandated by the city, which you see on the left, the kind of spine of, or let's call it the Grand Galleria of the project itself, which organizes a life within it, and the indoor and outdoor are fused into a singular experience. It becomes a public realm that's both outside and inside, air-conditioned and not air-conditioned, where population can migrate from daytime, where it's very hot, to nighttime, where it's cooler. And so showing you the ingredients, the public promenade along the water with its cafes and restaurants, then comes to life, particularly at night with events and performances and so on, and then moves indoor during the day into several levels which are still open to the outside, which are still part of the city movement system. And so that you get continuity, connectivity, and you get both the possibility of climate control and openness to nature within a singular development. And that extended to taking every roof surface within the complex to become both public and landscaped and accessible. And the dramatic move was to try and take all the components that make this a resort in the sense of parks and playgrounds and swimming pools and public observatory, and putting them on the 59th floor as a public place. And it was the first exploration where we recognized in a really dramatic way the potential of creating public outdoor spaces on the upper levels of high density urban development, and the extraordinary enrichment that that creates in terms of the urban experience. You got to be there to appreciate the difference between a public realm, which is within the street, on the ground, and the kind of quality of experience that occurs way up there. And we're just scratching the surface here. We had an opportunity to continue exploring both issues, how to make the public realm truly part of the city rather than introvert, rather than like a mall sucking energy away from the city streets to reinforce it, as well as exploring the possibilities of the upper levels of a complex. This is the city of Chongqing. When we were commissioned for this project 10 years ago, I never heard of it before. I doubt that many of you know about it. It's the biggest city in China. It has 33 million people. The site itself is very strategic because it's the convergence of the Yangtze River, the Brown River on the left side, and the Jialing River, the Blue River, and literally that is the color of the water, that merges at the point where the site is. It's called the Emperor's Landing because that's where the city was founded by the emperor many, many centuries ago. And the project was to develop the entire area fronting on the piazza that had been built there some years ago as kind of the anchor of the entire city and of the downtown. And this explains the history of the site as the landing point where the ships would come up and down river into the city. And my notion about trying to put 1,100,000 square meters of space on it was to try and see how do we develop a complex of 8 towers where they somehow coalesce to be more than just the individual parts. And also, how do we take 200,000 square meters of shopping and public spaces and tie them into the city street system so that it seamlessly flows through. And as it is always helpful in China, you have to have a good narrative. And so the sailboat narrative became kind of the jumping point of the kind of organization of the towers as they boat forward downriver, sail-like, bridging on the 50th floor with a conservatory, not a sky park like in Singapore, but recognizes Chongqing's very difficult climate, extremely hot and polluted at summer and cold at winter, as an enclosed, glazed conservatory. So the project has just opened, but I want to go through some of the main strategic moves. One was to try and make the retail spaces in the building an extension of the street system of the city. So those green lines which are coming towards this dead end site are the main shopping streets of downtown Chongqing. And as they extend towards the plaza, they become pedestrian. And in order to achieve that, we took the traffic, which is the red, and rerouted it to the circumference. And that way we get complete continuity with the street system. We also are playing up the level change between the city, which is 5 stories higher than the river. And so those green lines, as they come into the project, they hit the roof of the project and therefore enabled us to make the entire roof of many hectares into a public park. So you see in section, the city streets split. Either you stay on top and you enter the park, or you descend towards the piazza through this world of shopping and entertainment. And you can see here how the city streets extend and then become these, you can see them through the skylights, the street that penetrate towards the piazza. And as you move through, you have constant reference points to the towers above as you move towards the water. The conservatory, again, is a way to explore how we get different functions, restaurants, the hotel lobbies, public observatories, parks and swimming pools up high in the structure. This lets you see the whole range of facilities going on in there, hotels and restaurants, entertainment, and so on. And here, the public observatory overlooking the confluence of the rivers. And the inevitable glass floor to look down over the city below. The last project, we're going to have trouble again now.
We'll pull it up, it's okay.
The last project I want to talk, oops.
They can see you,
They can see me, okay. The last project I want to talk about is a recent one. It's a competition that we lost, but I'll show it to you anyhow because I'm very pleased with it. It is a competition invited to 4 architects in Abu Dhabi to create the Abrahamic Center, which is in one, oh, Jewel first. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so let's go on. Let's go back to the, sorry. The challenges of technology as compared with being you face-to-face in an auditorium, seeing your faces and hearing your reactions. The last project I want to show on that subject is a recently completed Jewel project in Singapore. Can you see the screen now?
Not yet. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So Jewel was again, it was a competition and it was formulated as a question. This is Singapore Airport. And there are 3 major terminals. And the airport wanted to create a new center that connects all these terminals and unifies them. And it gave us a very detailed program, each to a developer with their own architect, of lots of retail, shopping, airport facilities, theaters, The premise is that it serves the passenger, the airport population, I mean the working force of the airport, and the city at large, so that it is not inside the airport, it is outside the control zone. And the premise was, we need all these functions plus a major attraction. But they didn't say what the attractions are. The attraction is. The developers, many propose, of course, why not theme parks, Disney, dinosaurs, dinosaur park, etc. But our team, our team, as the architectural team, proposed something quite different, because I felt that all theme parks are limited in the number of times you would visit. You needed something timeless, something that wouldn't wear off, something that would offer some attraction to all ages. And we propose to do a magical garden, a garden like no other garden before, a garden under glass so that it is within the climate control that was required by the program, but something that would cohabit the shopping and all the other facilities. And what we were thinking of, if we were successful, we would be able to show that it's possible within an intense urban development to integrate nature with a marketplace, with a bazaar, in a way that maybe offers new insights and relationships. So you see here in the cross section, there are several levels of retail with light penetrating all the way through a series of gallerias, and they go around in the elliptical circle. And from the fifth level and descending down all the way to the bottom of the project is this garden. And because the roof is a toroid, all of it drains through the center, so that in a good rainfall, you would get 12,000 gallons a minute coming through the project, water being harvested, utilized for irrigation, etc. And all of you who have flown out of Ben Gurion Airport know where the idea came from in the first place. The inverted dish of the rotunda at Ben Gurion draining the rain into the center, which was supposed to be activated also when it's not raining, but then maintenance in Israel is not the same as maintenance in Singapore. This is the project as it opened just I guess it's a year ago now. It's actually transformed life in Singapore. On the first day, we had 250,000 people. On the third day, we had 500,000, actually 600,000. And what we've seen here is this kind of integration of this garden with its trails and its many attractions for young people and so on, integrating with a real marketplace where there are almost 1 million square feet or 100,000 square meters of shopping, working side by side, cohabiting side by side, but actually creating quite different environments. So the water which comes through has a major impact on the climate of the place, and it's quite fascinating to see how the mist and the temperature ingredients are affected by it. The criteria was to create comfort for people and then select plants accordingly. It's not a botanical garden. It's not about creating exotic climates, but contrary, it's kind of the normal conditions for an urban place. As the water descends, the bottom 2 floors, it's captured by this single piece acrylic cone, which baffles the force of the water and channels it into its storage tank, but it becomes a major attraction that brings light into the lower level. And as you can see, I'm always obsessed with bringing light everywhere and deep into the building. There's nothing like daylight. But right next to it is this intense shopping environment, which is like, would make any mall goer very happy. And the two are sitting side by side. And from time to time, the restaurants and the cafes and so on open up into the garden and integrate the two environments. And at night, we've designed this to become a screen, and music and entertainment and lots of fun. And now I bring you to the project I began to talk about, which is the Abu Dhabi competition for a mosque, a synagogue, and a church together in the museum compound of Abu Dhabi. And for me personally, this brought many issues together. The issue of context, the issue of trying to relate to a particular program and place, the issue of the integration of nature with architecture, the technologies that we have been mastering and learning about in projects such as Joule that I just showed you. The site is across from Nouvelle's Louvre, looking also across to the Frank Gehry Museum that's under construction, the Guggenheim. And on the right side is Foster's Museum of, I think it is History. So this is very much a kind of place of institutions. And Abu Dhabi wanted to create this place of religious harmony, I guess I would call it. And I tried to develop from a single theme of the sphere, variations on a theme that would be adapted to the rituals and tradition of the mosque, the synagogue, and the church. And in each case to show both the unity and diversity within that general schema. And perhaps the cross-section explains it best. It's all built out of a lattice of steel, translucent panels and transparent panels, meaning glass, so that it is a lattice structure, space structure that forms these spheres. And the floor level is 1/3 up, so that you're actually within the sphere itself. The space under that's tucked between the three spheres is the visitor center and the kind of conference place of the Abrahamic Institute. The mosque swings up to create its minaret. Some have said it reminds them of a cobra. The synagogue is in the center. We'll see it in a moment. And the church spheres open up to create the cavity for the church bells. And so you see the three chambers. The mosque on the left faces Mecca. The synagogue in the center faces Jerusalem. And the church faces north. I don't know why north, but since there's no prescription, I figured north is good. And here are the three set in a pond of water and reflecting the structure below, containing the visitor center under them. And at night, as they glow, because it's a fabric structure. And then the mosque with its mihrab and the light coming from above, actually from the minaret, the skylights in the minaret facing Mecca. The synagogue, Sephardic style, with the bima in the center and the sitting in the round, with Aron HaKodesh facing a window in Jerusalem direction, with the kind of toroidal roof that focuses on the bima and creating a tension between the central bima, which is the community, and Aron HaKodesh, which is sanctity. And the church, with its altar and sitting more in a directional style towards that altar, with the leaning cross. The leaning cross is actually a evocation of Jesus carrying the cross towards the crucifixion, which seemed to me to embody the suffering of the Jesus rather than kind of the actual act of the crucifixion, which I presented in a church that I designed in Colombia to the Archbishop there, who thought it was such appropriate symbolism, he would not prescribe it for all his churches. So this was an imported concept from another church. But you can see how the three spaces, each within a sphere basically, took on another sense of the ritual of its particular community. And below, the visitor center and the conference center, didactic place for meetings, etc. So I'd like to say one thing in conclusion, which is to pull back and to ask, where are we going? Well, I won't try and go back to the questions of density, mobility, urban structure, but I want to talk about something more particular, which is with all the new technologies that we have, the new tools, where should we be focusing in terms of the process of design? And I like to refer to these images of design in nature. This is the X-ray through the wing of an eagle, showing the extraordinary lattice structure that nature evolves to give maximum strength for minimum weight. Or, you know, the patterns of the nautilus shell of gnomotic growth, the fascinating tensile structure, and so on and so forth. Or even the more familiar and direct example of just how a tree transforms itself through the seasons, from winter to summer, and to just project how all this can be inspiring with the kind of new tools that we have in terms of the integration of the method, the tools of design, with the possibilities of trying to achieve the kind of fitness in architecture that we've never been able to do before. If I rephrase it, I would say we tended until now to always build with very primitive means an approximation of what real fit in nature has demonstrated itself to be. And I think that we need to now go beyond that. Can we integrate nature with urbanism? Can nature and urbanism become a singular experience? Can architecture and plant life be integrated in such a way that we would stop thinking about nature and architecture in contradictory terms? And these are big questions. At this point, I would just remind us all one critical thing, that all of these are tools. Parametric design is a tool. And all the analytical means that we have are tools. And 3D printing is a tool. And so we must remember that these tools allow us to do a range of things. To me, trying to remember that what we're trying to do is to achieve a fitness to purpose as we use those tools is going to indicate whether we are able to actually take advantage of these in a more fundamental, profound way or more superficial way. And with that, I leave you and I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much for a wonderful lecture and also for a tour around the world, which at the moment we can only imagine. So,
Me too, by the way. I can't even go and inaugurate my new project in Chongqing.
I can only imagine. I would like to invite now our audience to post questions in the chat or in the Q&A that we can address to Moshe. And maybe until they do that, I can start with a question which you started actually now at the end of your talk to discuss, which relates also to the student presentations that we saw today in the studio of David Robbins and Nathan Kimmel, where we see an infiltration, I would say, of technology from manufacturing processes, as you were saying, 3D printing or robotic fabrication, to computational workflows. And my question to you is, when do we see this, or when do you see this through a reflection of your work and maybe of the future as a good disruption, so as a positive leap forward? And when do you see it as a distraction? When the tool actually doesn't have the, as you were saying, the fitness criteria or the evaluation to generate quality. If you would like to elaborate on that a bit.
You know, I think you're touching on one of the central questions that face us today. And, you know, I'm of two sides. One side of me is the old-fashioned side that's pre-computer and uses a pencil, and I go around the office and I say to people, try it, you know, it actually is not a bad tool. You know, sometimes where I see people stuck with the rigidity of the computer, and I'm going down to just fundamental CAD, never mind the new tools. At the same time, I do recognize extraordinary possibilities. We could not have built Joule that I just showed at Changi Airport without these tools. They were essential to being able to do it. But I also recognize the seductive quality of these tools and how they can mislead us. It's so easy to take a program and plug in a few pieces of criteria into it and generate the most extraordinary, beautiful forms. They're totally seductive. You can fall in love with them and say, there, I got a building. You know, it just is compelling. But in reality, that might have nothing to do with what you're trying to solve in terms of an environment. It's just a very exciting formal spatial arrangement. And so for me, the question is, how do we find the balance between setting the question and using the tool to address that question effectively? Right now, there is a swing in the direction of being obsessed and mesmerized by the tools, but not going back to the fundamental question. And often you go through a lot of contortions and you say, really? I mean, that's, you know, you could have known that before or without it. So I'm a little concerned that both in terms of our pedagogic programs and certainly in practice, which is even more critical, we maintain a critical mind as we use those tools and test all the time whether what they're giving us is actually enriching and making the response to the design question at hand more effective. Mm-hmm. But in the big picture, what I tried to point out when I showed those images from nature is, won't it be amazing to design a building envelope instead of doing the perpetual glass office tower in the middle of the city that kind of grow leaves at summer and shade the building and shrink and shed them so the sun can come out come into it at winter, and houses that transform from being greenhouses at winter, open up to the sky at other times. I mean, just think of the possibilities of a positive way of imitating nature that these tools might give us, but that they come from questions that originate in the way we live and the way we want to experience space.
Thank you for that. I will read a question from posted by one of the audience. Do you have any projects currently being planned in Israel? And I will add to that, how do you see the difference for yourself in terms of the understanding of locality when you do design projects in this context?
Projects in Israel, I'm working on one project in Tel Aviv, Bet Asya, with Alfred Akirov. And I think that's the only substantial one right now. The other question, maybe more interesting, is how do you understand a place? So I think, first of all, I would say you have to have a fundamental humility about this. And by that, I mean that you come to a place that you don't know, or you know little about, and you've got to take the time to try and understand it. And that means at many levels. I mean, the Museum of the Sikhs is an example. There's India, which is one context. There's the climatic questions. There's particular Sikh questions. I had to put a lot of energy and I guess curiosity to start with to try and understand some of these. But I also felt that once you do, there is some way where you start understanding the essence of what the architecture there is all about and try and relate to it without doing pastiche. And this is a tricky test because we've seen, for example, the work of a lot of Western architects building in the Emirates and in the Middle East, and they think they're doing little arches and little domes and everything is okay. They've just captured the spirit of the Middle East. Well, there's so much more to it. And it has to go into so much more depth if it's to prevent being pastiche. But at the same time, there are profound differences in lifestyle, and particularly if your work is in such extreme range of cultures like Senegal and China and Jerusalem.
Yes, very different. Another question, as we see malls, airports, and the public realm in general closed by COVID-19, how do you think architecture will change in order to adapt? Is there even a need to adapt?
Well, in the optimistic sense, I hope there's no need to adapt because we'll get a vaccine and life will come back and we'll live happily ever after. But there are lessons that we learned during COVID, and I hope we don't forget them. For example, we learned that when you're locked in your own environment, your demands of it are much greater than they would have been if you just went on and just spent the nights there and, you know, the weekends and had the freedom to travel and spend half your time in restaurants or clubs. What you demand of your environment, what you demand of any environment has changed. And I hope we remember that when COVID is over. I also think that we've come to recognize how inefficient and deficient our cities are in terms of open spaces and parks and so on. I wrote a little piece where I suggested if you could think of New York with Central Park extending from the Battery all the way up to the Bronx, instead of being just between 59th and 110th Street, you would instantly come to a city that's exceedingly more friendly and environmentally friendly and so on than New York with just a little Central Park. Not so little, but relatively little. I think a third of urban space should be green. A third. I didn't quite make that in Modi'in, but we got close. And I think that it should be intertwined in the city in a kind of continuous network, not in just different pockets. In other words, just like there's a continuity to streets and to boulevards, there should be a continuity to the park so that it actually forms a continuous network. You could call it a necklace or braid, a braid. So there are lessons coming out of COVID that makes us see both urban life and our personal life and our workspace life quite differently that I think we should maintain or remember.
Another interesting question from somebody calling himself a young architect. As a young architect at the beginning of his career, how were you commissioned habitat without any prior experience? And do you think this is a reality that can happen today?
That's a good question. Well, first, how did it happen? It was a fairy tale. And I mean that seriously. I mean, when I look back. So think of the ingredients. 25-year-old, never built a building, happens to have gotten a job as a civil servant in a government department to design the master plan of Expo, of a World's Fair, proposing his thesis or development of his thesis to government, and not only being the idea being approved and funded, but then given the opportunity to open an office in order to achieve it. Because I mean, the most moving moment was when the people at Expo, the head of construction said, you have to resign now and open your own office. There's no reason you should do it as a civil servant. So could it happen today, and what were the ingredients? First, there was an idea that, I guess looking back, was a powerful idea. There was a chutzpah of a young Israeli who was, I went to Reali and it said Be'atznei Lechet, but probably it took a few decades to sink into my head. So I probably had the nerve to propose it with complete self-confidence. But I should say, I guess I'll use a Hebrew word, without shachtzanut. It was all about the issues. But also there was an openness. I mean, the people who backed me were civil servants. They had to take big chances. They were exposing themselves to big risks. And so I don't doubt that today a young architect would come up with equally compelling ideas and be as determined behind them as I was. I'm sure that's possible. But I pray, because I don't know the answer, that the people in charge up there, the adults, let's call them, would have the open-mindedness and trust to go forward with them. And I guess that answer would vary regionally. You need civil servants and private sector business people who have faith in young people. And I just hope that the answer would be affirmative. Not so sure everywhere.
Thank you for the honest answer. Do you have energy for one more question, or should we? Yeah. So there's a question here. How do you think architecture and urban design should tackle urgencies such as climate change and food shortage? Do you think we need to reinvent our cities?
I don't quite understand the nuance of the question. Food shortage? Can you repeat?
I mean, the question is stating that climate change, which would cause food shortage, and do we need to reinvent our cities in relation to these urgencies?
I think we need to reinvent our cities for many reasons. I mean, climate change is a big force, definitely a big force, but there are other forces that we need to contend with. I think mobility is a force. I think we need, let me even preamble that. One lesson of COVID for me, I mentioned it earlier in our review, is if anybody is coming out of the COVID crisis thinking that we will not need to go shopping again because we'll do it online and we don't need to leave our house because we'll work at home, I think that's an illusion. I think if anything we learned in the last period is the desire for contact, for community, for the experiences which take us to live in cities. And I don't think we're going to be seeing a big kind of retrenchment out of the public realm at all. Having said that, I think mobility is probably the biggest force that's going to change cities. So where is it going? It's not going to be cars. I think that driverless cars are the next generation. By that, I mean like 30 years from now, not immediate, in my opinion. So we're going to have a variety of ways of trying to deal with mobility. I think it's going to be vehicles on demand. I think it's going to be a combination of that with improved transit, but mobility is going to change. As soon as there's a change in transportation modes, there'll be a change in urban form. And I think that's probably the most critical thing, which will contribute to the issue of climate and will contribute to many other issues, but that's what we need to crack. The other question is, when does density get to be too high a density? And in many cases, we see the extreme of very, very high densities, and then a big drop in density at the perimeter. And I think that one of the things we're learning is that we can reduce the highest densities while raising the lower densities and get a better balance. But we will always have a desire for those who want to live in very intense urban places and those who prefer to live in less proximity to things, but more rural setting. And I think that that will remain. So to conclude, I think mobility, transportation as a method of dealing with climate. Of course, architecture itself in terms of how it consumes energy and how it consumes resources and so on is part of how we deal with climate change. And that's something which evolves. We're evolving with it. We're beginning to understand it only.
There's one more question I have to ask that just got posted, and we will end with that. And it's the ultimate question, I think, which is what would you most like to plan and where?
You mean going forward?
Yes.
Well, you know, the original habitat, which never got built, we didn't see it, I didn't show it today, was the beginning of thinking about the city three-dimensionally. I mean, habitat as we built it is the village, but in the city, there was a greater hierarchy. So the project that I showed that came out of the research study with the three-tiered city, with its porosity, its mixed use, takes those ideas and goes a step further. So I guess what I would dream of doing is now, with everything we've learned, building habitat and with the projects in Asia, to have the opportunity to create a sector of the city that's three-dimensionally organized, that might show how zoning might be in the future three-dimensionally organized, which has a mix of uses that kind of demonstrates how all these pieces come together, including dealing with the mobility question as a sector. And where? I do it anywhere that is prepared to build it.
A good answer. So with this, I think that we will conclude what has been quite an amazing evening, I think, for the first day of presentation. And we are, I will say it again, extremely humbled to have you with us. It means a lot. And I can only say toda raba. And we hope to see you again and again and again.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody from the audience, also for posting the questions and for joining us. And have a lovely evening and see you all tomorrow. Goodbye. Thank you.